Thank you all for showing up. My name's Ann Paradiso. I'm a notoriously anxious public speaker doing this because I love gym, but I hope that, and also because I'm passionate about the work that we're talking about today. So I hope that you find some of this content useful or interesting. Okay, let me see if I can get everything working. I have two pairs of glasses, one for this close and one for that close. Beer here for my social anxiety. Okay, here we go. So I'm Ann Paradiso. I am a designer at Microsoft Research. I specialize in interaction design, and I work at the intersection of AI, disability, and expressivity largely. I've been at Microsoft Research for about 20 years, and I'm going to talk about, hello, I'm going to talk about a 7-year period of work that I did with several of my collaborators when I was on a team called Enable, and it was the most meaningful and awesome work I have done in my career. So I'm going to share a little bit of that with you. Okay, so the whole purpose of the talk and the anchoring of this talk is really to discover your purpose and your passion in work. So there is this awesome visual communicator online who this is not my work here, but I love this guy, and this is, it sort of encapsulates kind of spirit of what I want to talk about today, which is when we combine our passion and our purpose and our commitment to a higher good, we can do all kinds of things that we didn't think were possible. As I mentioned, I worked on a team in Microsoft for about 7 years called the Microsoft Enable team. And we were an engineering and research team that focused largely on improving quality of life for people living with severe motor and speech disability, largely people within the ALS community, people living with motor neuron disease, which is a progressive terminal illness that ultimately usually results in people losing the ability to speak, move, and breathe on their own. So this was our community that we worked with. Our approach in this work is largely human-centered and participatory. So we wanted to build and explore technology innovations with this community and not for this community. We relied heavily on partnerships and collaborations, a lot of stuff cross-discipline with clinical communities, medical communities, nonprofit organizations, families, and people living with ALS. And our goal is to advance the field all up, advancing the state of the art, and that is across the board from a 360 degrees perspective. And so as a result of that, whoops, I should probably learn how to use PowerPoint. For about 7 years, we collaborated, and our output were technologies, downloads, research publications, code, all kinds of things that would further open up this space for other people who want to work and support people in marginalized and under-resourced communities. Our initial spark is a guy named Steve Gleason. I don't know if anyone's familiar with Steve Gleason, but he's from our area. He's from Washington State, and he was a professional football player for many years before he got ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, at a young age in his 30s. And he's been a longtime collaborator of Microsoft's and of mine, and he is our inspiration and basically the source of everything that we have done over the 7 years that we worked in this space. And Steve is also a dad. He's an innovator. He is an advocate, and he's a writer. And he's a strong advocate for purpose, living a purpose-filled life and working in a purpose-fueled space. The origins of the whole project started in about 2014. Microsoft had just changed leaders, and we have a leader now named Satya Nadella. And when he first came on, he implemented this notion of the hackathon, or the 1 week. And I don't know if people are familiar with hackathons. Is anyone familiar with a hackathon? Okay, so for folks, so lots of people, yes. For folks who aren't, hackathons are technology competitions. And what happens in Microsoft is one time a year, they basically give everybody a week off to get together and work with people outside of their normal group and normal team on projects that they find meaningful, that they think are impactful and can move the needle forward. And so in 2014, Microsoft had a relationship with Steve Gleason. They had an advertising relationship. The Surface was on Super Bowl commercials and things like that. And Steve wrote a letter to Satya Nadella basically challenging him and saying, hey, I'd like to be, at this point, Steve has progressed in his ALS and he isn't able to speak and move and he's breathing on a ventilator and he's a force of nature. He wants to do all the things that he wants to do. And he's saying, I need to be able to move independently. I need to be able to win arguments with my wife. Steve's wife is a force of nature. That's never going to happen. It does not matter what technology innovations, kind of come through. That's not going to happen. But he also said, and I want to have a more meaningful relationship with my kid. And so that year, a group of people came together and they formed a hackathon team and they tried to build a wheelchair that could be driven with the eyes. And for folks who aren't familiar with ALS, it is a bit of a relentless disease, and it does ultimately rob the person living with it from a lot of their capabilities. But one of the things that it doesn't affect typically is the ability to move the eyes and the ability to think and feel and function, just like anybody who doesn't deal with a disability. And so that year, this group got together and they built a prototype of this wheelchair. And they won the hackathon. And as a reward for winning the hackathon, they got to spend an hour with Satya Nadella, and they got to pitch sort of what it would look like to make this thing real, to make it work, what they think, we might be able to do to take the technology forward. And as a result of that, a team was formed in Microsoft Research, which is the team that I'm on, to take that concept and to build it for real and to see what we could do with specialists and innovators to move the needle for this community. And that's what we did. We got together, built the wheelchair out, got it into Steve's hands, got Steve driving it. He was our first user, made a whole bunch of improvements there. And then we partnered with Swedish Neuroscience Institute, and we ran a preclinical trial with Dr. Mike Elliott, who runs the ALS clinic at Swedish Neuroscience Institute, and created a big obstacle course, ran a whole bunch of people with ALS through it, published a paper, and made that technology real. And that technology has now been taken to market by a company called Tolt Technologies and is now able to be used by people who need it. So that was a little bit of that. Where's my video? I have a sweet video. I'm gonna have to show you. I have a great video, and I'm gonna show you this at the end of Steve driving his wheelchair. So we went to his house, we brought it to him, got it all set up for him, weren't sure if it was gonna work. I was out playing with his son because I couldn't actually work on the hardware, and they came in and he was using it. And so we have a video of that, and then we have another video that I'll show you in a little while there. But that was the origins of all of this work. And some of the work that I'm going to talk about today stems from that same work and the same community that we have been partnering with and innovating with ever since. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the project that I'm going to spend most of the time on today, which is a project called Hands-Free Music. And the inspiration for this is a guy named Jeremy Best, who is a collaborator of mine. He has ALS. He was a high school teacher for 20 years in Bellevue, a beloved high school teacher. He also got ALS at a young age. And Jeremy had been collaborating with us on several projects related to eye gaze technologies. And as we got to know him, we started to think about some things, and we learned that Jeremy had been in a band, and not only had he been in a band, but he was the front man for the band. He was the keyboardist for the band. He wrote their songs, and he also was a phenomenal drummer. So we started to think about that, and we had met several people. We built a community to work with throughout these 7 years, and several of the community members that we worked with had a relationship with music. So we started to think, how could we play music with just your eyes? And we started shopping this around, and everyone's like, oh, this is completely impossible. It's a terrible idea. The timing's too hard. It's too hard, don't do it. So we were like, yeah, we're definitely going to do it. So several of us got together as a complete side project, and we collaborated with Jeremy's wife and his brother, and we told them we wanted to do this, wanted to get their opinion about it, but we weren't sure if we were going to be able to make it work. So we didn't want him to know. And so in secret, several of us started working on a prototype. We got several people together across disciplines. We had a visiting researcher from UC Boulder who was a computer science researcher specializing in accessibility and accessible technologies. We had engineers, we had musicians, we had a whole bunch of folks. And we started working on this project. And so I'm going to show a little video that kind of tells this story better than I do. So the cowbell story. All right, so Jeremy's a character, and we brought him in. Okay, so here's what happened. I needed to anchor a whole bunch. It's like getting a whole bunch of cats to pull in the same direction. So I'm thinking, how do I do this? We knew we had a bunch of folks who were interested, who were committed, that could do the work, but we needed to kind of anchor them with a goal, a forcing function. So somehow I'm known for writing checks my ass can't cover. And we were having a session. Jeremy was in the lab. He had played an early prototype of the drums. And I sort of promised everybody in the room, hey, if we can get this working for real, I'll submit it to South by Southwest, which has a technology innovation track. And if we get in, I'm taking all of us to South by Southwest, knowing there's no way we're getting in. We're going to do this. I just wanted to get everybody to do it. And so we did. And we started to work on it. And this video was something that we had to create to submit to the Innovation Awards at South by Southwest. So we got everybody starting to work on it. And I wanted to do is inspire people's competition, but not with each other, sort of with some external force. And that was, sort of what we ended up doing here. And so, whoops. I'm going to talk a little bit about our methodology. Our methodology is highly scientific. It is very structured, very, very planful. And no, we just got in there and we just tried a bunch of shit and it didn't work. Then we tried something else. And that's basically what we did. And here's our motto is to embrace the chaos, embrace the constraints. And these are our methods. Yeah, so we didn't know if we could do it. We just really wanted to try, and everybody was all in on it. And so we started cracking on it. We had two proof of concepts, totally different proof of concepts that came from two different team members. There was a lot of overlap in that. So we started, one of the things that we wanted to think about here is if you're going to play, we started with percussion because we thought percussion would probably be the most achievable. And we knew that Jeremy was a drummer. And one of the things you have to deal with percussion is timing. And if you're using your eyes to play something, how are you going to get the control and the creative control that you need, but also be able to manage latencies? Even eye trackers, what happens when people use their eyes to drive or to type or to speak is they're looking at an eye tracker, which is a camera that's looking at their eyes, and it's shooting infrared light to find the pupils and the glint in the pupils, and then that gets translated into coordinates on the screen. And so the person can then look at things on the screen and control them. But what you need to do is you need to account for latency, because you have to look at something and the screen has to understand you're looking at it and that you want to activate it and that you want to click on it. And so there's latency there, which you don't have in music and things like that. So we started with a step sequencer, and we quantized that so that you could play in a sequence and you could still have, a collection of instruments and be able to play. Jeremy really wanted a hi-hat. The hi-hat is hard. It is 3 pieces in solving for all of that physically. We also wanted to create physical instruments that somebody could play and not just digital instruments. And so when he came in to test it out, he said he actually typed out on his eye gaze system, WTF hi-hat. And so we were like, okay, well, we didn't get the hi-hat working. And he said, well, I will have more cowbell. I just so happened to have a cowbell on my desk. I mean, that just really just randomly happened. And so my buddy Chuck went and took it into our hardware lab and he hooked it up to a drum kit and made it one of our instruments. So cowbell became one of our important percussion instruments. I want to show you, a little bit of the process of how this goes. So this is Jeremy here in the yellow shirt. And this is our lab. And this is the very first day he played the very first drum kit that we built. Again, we didn't know if it was going to work. He was in there to work with several other researchers on a variety of other research studies and prototypes. And we had the drums under a sheet. And he kept looking at it like, what is that? And we were like, you have to finish all this other stuff and then we'll get it out. So we got it out and I'm just going to play a little clip of that. Which the video, that's my bad, doesn't really show. But this was the very first proof of concept and we knew we were onto something. So we decided we're just going to keep on going with that. And then this is a couple of weeks later when we got the full kit built. We wanted a physical drum kit. We wanted it to be obnoxious. We wanted it to be loud. And here is the drum kit. We wanted it to also be expressive. One of the things that we wanted to solve for is how the person that's listening to the music can sort of link the instrument with the player. If you don't have hands doing this and a person doing this, how do you know who's playing and things like that? So what we ended up doing was we created a series of these custom LED lights that would light up when each note was played so that it would also create a visual expression of the music. And that was also we were just kind of getting that going when this started as well. And then you can kind of see here, finally got it all working. And this was right before Jeremy came in. And as it turns out, we won at South by Southwest. We went there and I given the talk to the guys, like, all right, you guys, doesn't matter if we win. We're here for Jeremy. What really matters is that we did it. We built something, we were able to achieve our goal. And it turned out we had gotten nominated in 2 categories. And we almost missed South by Southwest because I didn't see the email that we had gotten in. I didn't think we were going to get in and I'm terrible at email. And so I had like a day to respond and get all of the content in. But we won. And what ended up happening is we wanted to get Jeremy there. We couldn't get him there because the constraints for traveling, he had never traveled on a plane and things like that were too high. So we brought him on this iPad. He's here, right here. And what they do when you submit for South by Southwest for the Innovation Awards is you are told somebody needs to write a tweet length acceptance speech in case you win. So I told Jeremy that was on him and we won and he delivered the acceptance speech through the iPad to the entire crowd. And it was a moment. And then after he delivered it, when we were on the stage, we found out that we didn't have his camera facing forward. So he was actually looking behind everybody while he was delivering it. But what was awesome about it is he gets on there and he had just changed his synthetic voice. He had this synthetic voice that had kind of a Southern drawl and it wasn't too easy to understand. So he switched it to a female voice named, I think her name was Karen. And so he gets on there to accept the award and he says, Jeremy Best coming at you with my new voice. This is better than public speaking. I'm not even wearing pants. And everybody just cracks up. And then he continues to deliver this glorious speech, which was way longer than tweet length. And we did not get kicked off the stage. Everybody else got kicked off the stage, but it was awesome. And the purpose here, or the point here, is that everybody here in this group everybody was doing this on their own time. This was not work that they were getting recognized for. This was not work that was in their commitments or anything like that. This was just a passion project, and it was awesome. And so then for a couple of years, we incubated several new instruments, interfaces, and music technologies. We brought interns in who were getting their PhDs in music technology and not in just computer science. And they created some spectacular new interfaces and worked directly with Jeremy and our community on that. And so then the pandemic happened somewhere like 2020. And all of us had to be at home. We couldn't work together. We couldn't work in each other's homes. We couldn't collaborate with the PALS. PALS is the acronym for people living with ALS. That's the community's acronym, because it wasn't safe, for them. And so we were trying to figure out how we would adapt and how we would continue to work on this space. And we got a request from our sort of marketing folks, and they had heard about our music, and they had a partnership with the Invictus Games. And I don't know if anyone's familiar with the Invictus Games, but it is, so Prince Harry, from the royal family, and well, I don't know if he's still in the royal family, but that's beside the point. But he was in the service, and he started the Invictus Games for veterans who had been wounded in combat so that they could play sport together in a competitive way. And what they wanted to do was they wanted to bring in more veterans to participate in the Invictus Games, even though they couldn't necessarily participate in sport. And they wanted to bring them in so that they could participate through music. So they asked us if we could build them some instruments and a collection of interfaces for these veterans so that they could score the Invictus Anthem, which was originally written by Chris Martin from Coldplay. And so this project, the Invictus Games, were canceled 2 years in a row. This was a project that went on between our group and a group of collaborators in the UK, all remotely during that time. And this is the result of that collaboration. So that was one of the pieces that went out around this. And this piece came out before the anthem was completed, but they did complete the anthem. They did play it at all of the award ceremonies at the Invictus Games in 2023, COVID time, whichever was the first year, 2022. Thanks, Joe. So I was going to talk a little bit about kind of the instruments that you see there and the adaptations that we had to make in order to make that happen. So when they first reached out to us and we listened to the score, we were like, oh shit. I mean, we have some pretty rudimentary instruments and interfaces, and this was an orchestral masterpiece. But I heard the tubular bells in there, and I thought, oh, we could probably build that, and we'll start with that. So we started working on that, and we came up with a simple little prototype. It was like on the, sent it to them. We kind of explained to them what we thought. They loved it. Sorry, that's me. That's super dorky. And we started to work on the interface, and we thought, okay, then how do we actually build the instruments? And so this is a little bit out of sequence, but we had a lot of trial and error. So I just want to remind you of our methodology slide here. Here's me trying to play it, to send it over to show them. And a little bit about that. So we built this all in-house. We got the tubular bells on eBay from a church in Grand Rapids, Michigan. They sent those out. We built a rig in our hardware lab and first got the bells sort of set up on a rig. We were working on the software prototype in parallel. Here's me and my buddy Chuck. As soon as we first got He's set up, dorking out. And then a little while later, we're working on it in the lab with the interface. Just a lot of trial and error, a lot of cacophonous noise, a lot of noise complaints. And so there was just a lot of this, a lot of iteration, working on things. How do we hit double notes? How do we make sure that the resonance is right? Make sure that it actually sounds good and that it's not wonky, something that our music director would want to work with. And then here is the actual demo of the instrument, which we named the Galactic Bell Star, because our friend Jeremy, who you met earlier, is a Star Wars fan and a Darth Vader super fan. And we thought our instrument sort of looked like Darth Vader. And so that's why we named it the Galactic Bell Star. But here's a demo of the instrument. That's dorky. We're nerds. This is just embarrassing. But the idea here was we were also simultaneously working with some kids who had a different collection of disabilities, but were also similarly impaired in terms of speech and mobility. And so what we also wanted to do was create instrument sort of prototypes or these kind of primitive components that could be built into a variety of instruments that could serve anybody who wanted to play them. So in this case, you could have multiple people playing the same instrument. And then this would also transfer, the software that we use for this would transfer to a variety of direct play percussions, or not that tubular bells are percussion, but striking type of instruments. And so just a little bit here. This is a bunch of the other work that happened along the way. We had student groups that asked to be sponsored, that built their own instruments. They built beautiful instruments and collaborated. We built just a whole suite of instruments, interfaces, and experiences around this. And some of it we published in academic literature, and the rest of it we put in the open source. And then, so I'm going to move away from that for a second and talk a little bit about another awesome hackathon project that happened in the same spirit of the Hands-Free Music Project, the Eye Gaze Wheelchair Project, and this one's called Paddlepalooza. So the Enable team that I mentioned earlier had two work streams. Our work stream was the work stream that worked on eye gaze technologies and eye gaze inputs. And the other work stream worked with the blind and low vision community, and they worked with spatial audio technologies. And they had built an application called Soundscape that would allow people who are blind to navigate their environment in a much richer way than they otherwise could. And so for the summer hackathon, the leader of that project, who's blind himself, had just been out kayaking and loved it, and was like, how can we have an inclusive paddle? How can we bring a bunch of folks that are blind into this event and let them go out and steer a kayak and paddle? And so this hackathon, this was in 2018, came about as a consequence of that. And so what they ended up doing was the team ended up taking the Soundscape application and they instrumented Lake Sammamish with these virtual beacons and created a scavenger hunt. And so what we partnered with Outdoors for All, which is a nonprofit organization that works on inclusive sporting activities. And they hadn't done a paddle yet, but they worked with our group. We worked with Parks Department and everybody to get this going. And it was important to us that our paddlers were steering, that they weren't just going to be passengers, in a kayak, but that they were going to steer, they were going to go find the beacons, and they were going to compete with each other. And so we had this amazing event called Paddlepalooza. And we put out a call to all of our friends for paddle partners because we wanted to keep it safe. So we put them in doubles. And the paddle partners, the sighted partners, were in the front, and they were only there in case of emergency and to help paddle. And the blind paddlers used the spatial audio to navigate the lake to the beacons and then kind of come back. And it was just a spectacular event. It just exceeded all of our wildest dreams. We had, we went around after it happened, and it was a competition, and there were teams, and they were serious about it, and there were prizes and stuff, but everybody talked about the sense of freedom that they felt that they had not felt before, and this sense of empowerment. And that gets to kind of the crux of the talk here and of the work, which is passion plus purpose plus community opens up all kinds of new possibilities, new experiences that have a tail that you can't even imagine. When we first started to do the hands-free music work, or even the eye gaze wheelchair work, we wouldn't have expected that an entire body of work would come out of that from other people, and other people that were passionate and also interested in the space. So this is just a little bit about Paddlepalooza. My favorite story from this is a bunch of our paddlers had service dogs. And one guy on the team, his job during the paddle was to manage the dogs, because they couldn't take them in the boat. And one guy, one of our paddlers, they were Team Graybeard, and they won. They won the event. The paddler, his service dog, jumped in to the water after him and chased the boat. And we had to go get the dog back. And it was just amazing. But this day was one of the best days I had in my entire career. And I feel like everybody who participated, whether it was somebody from the blind and low vision community, one of the volunteer paddlers, whether it was Outdoors for All or us, felt exactly the same way. And it was just really, really, really cool. And so I wanted to share a little bit of that with you as well. I think Jim said I should keep it short. Time management's not my specialty here, but I wanted to share a little bit of this kind of work with you all and show you what we've been up to, and show you, sort of what can happen if a small group of folks get together and try to tackle something with the power of purpose and passion. Thank you. Thank you. I'm a super anxious speaker. I appreciate your kindness.
Thank you very much. Well, and finishes her beverage. We'll actually, anybody, just raise your hand if you did not get a raffle ticket. We'll give away some prizes. You can have a seat for a second. Yes, Think and Drink swag, which means you get to be at walking advertising. And remember, it is still the season. In fact, it's more the season to wear this now than it is actually in the winter around here. So, in fact, it actually usually goes well when you come to this bar. So if you put this on, either this or a trucker hat, and you can totally come here and fit in wonderfully. All right. Turns out it's very hard to mix things in a beer glass, but whatever. All right, so we'll give away 2 of these things. And the last 3 digits are 902. 902. Joe! No way. All right. And the other one goes to Jim Old. I should probably look. Which one's the closer one's, Ant? That's not it. Damn. That's not it either. This is how old people party. All right. 893. Last digit's 893. All right. Congratulations. All right, and remember, if you didn't win tonight, we still have some more hats to give away. So probably somewhere towards the end of this year, we'll be moving on to some other part of your clothing. And since we've done hats, these kind of hats, we've done two kinds of hats. We've done shirts, we've done socks. I can't afford pants. Sorry, that's not going to happen. It's got to be underwear or scarf or what are the neck gaiter thingies? That kind. I don't know. Any other ideas? Clothing we should go after? Gloves. Ooh, nice. That could be cool. All right. All right. So if you got ideas, let me know. All right. So that's it. Just remind you, remember, second Tuesday of every month, come back and join us. But now we'll bring our speaker back up here and you can ask her questions. And come on up. Woohoo!
Yes. Did the drum set have cymbals? Yes. How did we compensate for the movement of the cymbals? Let me see if I have a good close-up of the cymbals. Oh, I remember. We didn't cymbal them together. We actually used, okay, so we used these strikers from a company in Poland that we found that were actually intended for like digital drums. And they're called perks. And they're these little balls on a stick, and they have a striker that comes out. And the striker, I think I actually might have a picture of it in here. We rigged that up to the two different cymbals. And so what would happen is on the sequence, let me go to this. You see this one here? And I got to remember how to use PowerPoint here. Let me see if I can show you a close-up of the drums. And it's the same thing that we did for the bells. The bells were a little bit easier to manage because we built a demo rig with the bells. But with the drums, let me see if I can zoom in. You can kind of see it here. Is up there, and the strikers are the little. You see the skull, small skull. Yeah. We had a few skulls. The skulls also had their eyes light up. You can see a striker right there. We fixed those. You see them all throughout the drum kit. We fixed them to every portion of the instrument. And that's how we did the cymbals. And the hi-hat was tough because it was 3 parts. It had a pedal, and you needed a, and we did not solve the hi-hat at all. He could play the hi-hat on just the digital interface. So the cool thing is we basically used a lot of MIDI protocols. And so MIDI protocols also allow you to speak to a physical instrument or to a music software system. So you can also have them play sounds from a software system like that are digital sounds, like some music fonts. And so you could play the hi-hat pretty well using Sound Machine, which was the app we used for the sequencer for the drums. But it wasn't perfect. Like we would so much and this was all before like the big AI breakthrough, right? And so now we're actually really interested in bringing a whole bunch of this stuff back in and looking at it through that new lens, like just across the board too. Like also some of the things that we're interested in is how musicians live communicate with each other. They do that a lot with signals that aren't verbal. They might look at each other, they might put their hand down if they're playing something, and that's how they sort of cue. This is another aspect of performance that we wanted to look at. But to answer your question, we never solved cymbals hitting each other. That was a good question. Yes. 2 feet. So most of it, what we looked at was we had a Surface device, which is a Microsoft computer that doesn't have a keyboard. And we used those. as the kind of intermediary. And the tracker, we bought these trackers, they were gaming trackers, and we used them off label. So we bought these third-party trackers and we hacked them that way. And so those trackers are about this big, and they're meant to be used 2 foot, which is usually the distance that you're looking at for a laptop or something. It is, let me see if I can find, I wish I had a bunch of backup stuff here to show you. So targets, okay. Eye tracking targets will largely depend on your ability to track. There's a whole bunch of things that can interfere with trackers too. Anything that interferes with infrared light, the sun, glasses, medications, tears, like a whole bunch of stuff. Typically speaking, for to type a letter on a keyboard, you would need a pretty small target and pretty good accuracy. All of our instruments, even that step sequencer, that's the one that had the smallest targets. We had 7 rows, and I'm trying to remember exactly the size that we came up with, but you needed to have some pretty good precision for the eye tracker. You didn't need that for the tubular bells. If you look at the tubular bells interface, which all of my stuff is videos, which is really annoying. So I can't show you. Let me see if I can find one. So look at this. Here are the tubular bells. Each one of those is a target. So, and you'll see a second set of bells on the top. It was a total hack. This is not skeuomorphic. Tubular bells don't do this. We had to solve issues because when you're looking from one note to another, you don't want to inadvertently trigger another note. And if you wanted to do something that's a double and you're using dwell, which means you're only using your eyes. So you're looking at your eyes to choose your target and then to activate your target. There is a latency there. It's usually like 900 milliseconds, sometimes 600. So if you wanted to do a double note, like in the Emperor's March, because of course we had to use that as our test case, we ended up, you'd have to look away and then look at it again. So we ended up creating a second row of buttons on the top there. But for this one, also, when you use eye tracking systems, you need to calibrate these systems to your own eyes. And there's a whole routine around that. But if your targets are big enough, you can actually get away with, if you don't move too many things, you can actually get away with not calibrating in some of these larger targets. And so in the Invictus stuff, the thing about Invictus is we didn't know any of the musicians going in. We didn't know what instruments they played. We didn't know what we would be working with. So we were constrained in that way. And so like, I would never choose to play guitar with like an Xbox adaptive controller, but it ended up working out for that piece. And we worked a lot with the music director and the creative who put the whole piece together and who worked with the musicians. We also didn't get to meet them. We didn't get to train them or do anything like that. So it was a little bit like, here's what we have. We'll send it over to you. Let us know. And we did a whole bunch of stuff just back and forth with that team. They're like, okay, we want to be able to do expression. We want somebody to just control expression on a single note. We need a slider. So we built the interface, but we had to go to the UK. There was no joystick that we could use that would work with our interface, that would work with the constraints people had. We found a small group of folks that would 3D printed one and built it like in the UK and did it in the time. Like the thing with stuff like this is people really will go the extra mile to contribute to stuff like this. People are very unselfish about it. And that you get a lot there when everybody's kind of anchored on that sense of purpose. But some of them, one of the interfaces we had just had 4 giant buttons. And they look like drums. You can style them to look like anything you want. You can create the feedback. Like there's a lot that goes into it to make it feel somewhat natural. So we had a couple that were huge that basically anyone could hit. And but yeah, on the drums, they were difficult. And Jeremy, we practiced with Jeremy a ton. We'd go to his house, we'd work with him, and we had different systems. We put it on his system, but we also put it on these larger displays that would create larger targets. And he would send us a report. It was a slider, sucks or fun. And it was always in the sucks. Like it was in the sucks for so long. And I'd watch him play it, trying to figure out why he's not able to actuate the notes. And finally, like a month or 2 months later, we found a little bug in the code that was causing all of it, and you just have to sit there and fiddle until you can kind of figure it out. And so once we fixed the bug, he was actually able to use it more. But it never really, I want to be clear about this, like Jeremy didn't get back in a band and start playing again. One thing he did do, which is not my work, but is awesome work, and if anyone's interested in this, there's a guy called Dr. Thomas Duell, and he's at UW in Seattle, and he's also a neuroscientist, and he built an instrument called the encephalophone that could be played with the brain. And Jeremy, they got a grant, and they recruited 5 people with a variety of speech and mobility disabilities to learn to play it. And 2 of them, Jeremy and this other guy who had MS, so he had speech, played it, and they had an orchestra, they brought a composer in, they did jazz, because jazz is great when you're trying this stuff, because no one ever knows if it's supposed to sound like that or not, so, but he played it with his brain, and they had a performance at Meany Hall, and it was awesome. And that was what we really wanted to, was for him to pick music back up again and things like that. And we still have a long ways to go for that. Paddlepalooza. That was. Oh, they were virtual. So the software is a piece of software that runs on the iPhone. And then they use spatial audio. So you have to have a headset that supports spatial audio. So spatial audio means you can hear it in more dimensions than you can hear in stereo. And they went in and they instrumented the lake using GPS virtual beacons. So there was no actual beacon in there. So the person would go to the first target and they would hear the pings or hear the affordances to move in that direction. And then when they got it, it would give them some reinforcement. You got that beacon. Now you got to go to the next one. So it was all virtual. And the team went out first before the paddle and instrumented it and created a custom version of this application and instrumented it that way. And so that's how that ended up working. Yes. Yes, it was. And it is, so the teams, a lot of things have happened since this time. There have been a lot of layoffs in tech and a lot of cuts and things like that. And our team is the Enable team was always an incubation team. Incubation teams are not meant to be long-lived teams. They're meant to incubate something and graduate it up. So what they ended up doing is partnering. So Soundscape was an app you could just download for free. And now that tech has been transferred, it's been open sourced, and another nonprofit is hosting it, Soundscape. Thanks. Thanks, everyone.